Hello, students. So we are starting our next unit, Unit 5, which is Cellular Respiration. This is on page 51. While I read the unit objectives, you can go ahead and start with your goal box where you're going to name one success you had last unit in science class, one strategy that helped you be successful, and make a goal for this unit. So again, we're on page 51. So our objectives for this unit is to describe the relationship between the reactants and products of cellular respiration. So this is a chemical reaction, which was our last unit. You're going to explain the differences in energy levels between reactants and products. We learned a little bit about this in the last unit also, about the energy that we take in and get out. And now we're going to talk about it in the terms of cellular respiration. We're going to use the cellular respiration model to explain how matter is rearranged. We learned that last time, to get energy from chemical bonds being broken and the molecules being rearranged. So this goes right into what we learned last time. And then we're going to use cellular respiration model to show how matter and energy are neither created nor destroyed. So that would be the law of conservation of mass and the law of conservation of energy. So again, we're just going to review what we've already learned. So here, if we take a look at everything, they're all in the act or doing something. They are all eating. So we have learned that all living things need to consume or take in food or nutrients in order to get energy. And we talked about that last unit and how matter rearrangements can create energy in living things. So how exactly does this happen? So if you can see, these kids are going on a little kids run half mile, and we're gonna try and figure out the energy that they get from like eating. Obviously, they probably had some food, or if they didn't have it before, they're definitely gonna want some after. And we're gonna see how our body like stores energy and where we actually get it from. Because I did tell you it's about the bonds, but we're gonna go dive deeper into that. So what do we already know, or what have we already learned? You all told me that we all do need to eat. Why do we need to eat? And that is to obtain or get the matter and energy that we need to survive. So that was our main idea last unit. So in our exploration of chemical reactions, last unit, we tracked both matter and energy and switched our attention back and forth between the two. So now before we move forward, we're gonna separately review what we know about each of these items, matter and energy, and there may be connections between the two, and we will acknowledge and talk about those as we go along. So remember, food is our fuel. We can think of it like a car. We talked about our inputs would be gas, and we know that we need oxygen. So we put the inputs, like the fuel, into a car. Our bodies would be the car. We use it to do activities, running, breathing, jumping jacks, push-ups, sit-ups, walking to class, running to class, catching the bus, whatever. And then we have our outputs, which we talked about as pee, poop, breathing, all that kind of stuff, sweat, tears. So how does the car get energy from its fuel? What was the reaction that we talked about? We talked about burning, or that combustion reaction. Remember when I was burning the Cheeto and I was burning the ethanol, and I asked you all if we actually burn, or if we are burning up if we start on fire, and hopefully you all said no. I'm not talking about the heartburn that we might feel when we eat something. I was talking about literally, like, is there a fire in you or on you when you eat? And we said no. So if food is essentially our fuel, like I said, we talked about burning calories, burning carbs, and burning fat. And we're still trying to figure out how we actually get this energy from food through this burning process. So let's think back to that Cheeto that we burnt. Remember, it gave off carbon dioxide and water. There's still some left, and it kind of models what happens in our body without the actual flame, but it is called burning. So it gets broken down how the Cheeto went from a big Cheeto like that into like the burnt crispy end that was kind of almost nothing. So let's think about substances that burn once they've been lit on fire. So if we think about like a log or the wick of a candle, remember the wax of a candle doesn't actually start on fire, it melts. So that's a little bit different. You want to think of the actual wick of the on a candle. And then do we suspect that they have anything in common? And we want to record any thoughts you have in box A. So if you want to, if you're working with a partner today, you can talk to a neighbor briefly and be prepared to write in your ad puzzle probably what they have in common. So if these are the fuels, like I said, a candle, but we want the actual wick. So right here, not the actual like wax around here. You can think of logs, coals, anything that actually will start on fire, paper. So what do these substances have in common in terms of maybe energy or in terms of matter? And any ideas that you have, you can write in box A before we go through it together. So what is it that makes something a fuel? So here's paraffin wax. We broke it down molecularly into those chemical compounds of, look at all these carbons and all these hydrogens. If we look at heptane, which is a gasoline, again, carbons, hydrogens. Methane, a natural gas, carbon, hydrogens. Propane, fuel, carbons, hydrogens. If you look at, I think this one is wood, there's some oxygens, but all these rings are carbons, 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 hydrogens, hydrogens, hydrogens. So what is it that makes something a fuel? There's lots of carbon, hydrogens, and then some oxygens. What else do these fuels need in order to burn or like to release their energy? What is the other reactant when something burns? Remember, you need what to keep a fire going? You need oxygen. And what else do we need to take in besides our food? What do we breathe in? We breathe in oxygen. So oxygen is definitely one of the reactants in our energy releasing reactions. Anything that we do that releases energy is going to need oxygen as an input or a reactant, a starting. So we're going to write all that down in box A. So I know your book, if you want to like try and break the seal, it might help you. But our question for this unit, or what we're looking at right now, is how do we get energy from food? This is page 52. And we're going to break it down into the fuels, any organic fuel or like things that occur naturally in the world. We call it organic carbons. This contains molecules from living things. Remember, we as humans and other living things are made out of that carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and some nitrogen. And remember, they are carbon-based. So we went over what do these things have in common. If you think about, if you think about like wood or coals, that oxygen is a reactant or an input or that starting stuff. And then what do they have in common in terms of matter, or what are they made up of? Remember, matter is the substances that we or anything that has, I don't know, substance or like any paper or like our fingers or this desk, anything that has matter is pretty much everything. And what is it made up of in the most simplest terms, like elements, that they're all made of C, carbon, H, hydrogen, and O, oxygen. And then in terms of the energy, everything has stored potential energy. Remember, you can't always see energy. So it might be stored as their potential to release energy or cause reaction. And another thing that they have in common for energy is that oxygen is the energy releasing reaction. So then we're going to move on to what exactly is burning. So we talked about that burning is the reaction that breaks down our food into energy, but what actually is it? So we start with our fuel as our reactants or the starting stuff. And then what other reactant do we need again? What other thing do we take in? What do they have in common? Oxygen. Then once the oxygen and the fuel start on fire and ignite, energy is released and it gives us our products. So here we have the fuel or the oxygen again. Then once it starts on fire, energy is released. Remember, the energy goes down through the chemical reaction and it releases carbon dioxide and water. And we will write all this together now in box B. So what is burning? Burning is the carbon-based or the organic molecules. That react with oxygen to give off carbon dioxide, which we breathe out, and water. So we take the carbon fuel, whatever fuel it is, it could be any type of fuel. And remember, we need the oxygen. Creates a reaction that releases energy and gives out carbon dioxide and water. So if we need a reminder on what all these mean, it's just carbon, hydrogen, some oxygen, plus oxygen like the gas in the air, gives off carbon dioxide and water. I want you to remember that these are the reactants or the starting stuff. And then this sign over here after the arrow is the products. We'll be using those words a lot, so make sure that we know what they mean. All right, but now what happens when we eat food? So you guys told me we need food in order to release our energy or to get energy. And we just said that the carbon fuel, which is the C, carbons, hydrogens, and some oxygens, plus oxygen we breathe, will release energy and give us carbon dioxide and water. But are we like this little human here that has fire burning in our bellies? No, it's not actually on fire. So how does our definition of fuel, the carbons, hydrogens, and some oxygens, and burning, which is a reaction that gives off carbon dioxide and water, how does that fit into our understanding of what might be happening with the carbs, proteins, and fats in our body that we need to consume from our food? So right now, I just want you to brainstorm. Think about any ideas you have in box C on what happens when we eat food. So what questions do you have? What ideas do you have? How does basically, like, where does this energy come from? And I want you to be as detailed as you can think. Again, this is just your brainstorming, your ideas. Just tell me, how does our definition of fuel, so if you think like those logs and everything with the carbons and hydrogens and burning, fit into what happens with the carbs, proteins, and fats? Maybe think about what carbs, proteins, and fats are made of. So based on this idea, we know that we aren't starting on fire. We do know that we are using something with burning or the reaction of combustion that breaks our food down. So we're going to try and figure out what is the reaction that happens in our bodies or in our cells, and how is it the same or different than burning? Because obviously we're not starting on fire. So like what actually is going on? And that's what we're going to break our class model and our ideas down into. So that's our big question that we're going to answer this unit. So our driving question again on page 52 right there is, so our driving question overall is, what is the reaction, the chemical reaction in our cells, and how in the body is the reaction the same as and or different from burning? Because obviously we're not spontaneously combusting, we're not going up in flames here when we eat something. So how is it the same but also different from burning? Like how does that happen in our bodies and our cells? So one time when we need a lot of energy is when we exercise. If you guys do any sports or anything, I'm sure you deplete your energy or like you feel worn out after you play a sport, especially if it goes on a long time. So that's when we need a lot of energy. And what happens when we exercise? How does our body respond? Like what is going on when we exercise? What are some physical responses? Like I'll give you one, we're probably sweating. What else happens or changes when we exercise? So if you had a moment to think, we are on page 53. So what happens when we exercise? I gave you one, we increase the sweat that we have probably. If you're doing a really hard workout or like running around a lot or football or basketball, whatever, your heart rate probably increases, or like you can feel your heart racing if it's a really like if you're sprinting really fast. And also you're probably breathing heavier. So all of these things are our outputs. We output sweat. We don't take in sweat. Our heart rate is something you can feel. Your breathing rate when that's an output. So all these increase our outputs. And this shows that there's an increased energy demand, which increases the reaction, whatever this chemical reaction is that we're talking about in the body, which increases the rate of our carbon dioxide breathing rate. So remember when you're breathing out like that, you're breathing out carbon dioxide. Sorry, there we go. So remember, CO2 is carbon dioxide, and that's our output. Oh, sorry. Okay, so the chemical reaction that we got is burning for energy. So we take, should be a review from what we just talked about. We take that carbon fuel, which is carbon, hydrogen, and some oxygen, plus the oxygen we breathe in, releases energy. We breathe out carbon dioxide and release water through sweat, pee, whatever. So thinking about our burning reaction, which is pictured above, and the ways in which our body responds to exercise, is there a way to test whether there is a relationship between the rate of chemical reaction and the increased energy needs during exercise? I mean, I'll give you a hint. We are going to test this and we'll be doing a lab, not today, but eventually. So an investigation that we are going to do is what is the connection between increased energy demand and the rate of burning or the output of CO2?